The cowboy saw bruises on her arms and told her, "Pack your things, you're mine now." Jack was a man in his mid-30s, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands hardened by years of working on the land. He was known in the town as quiet but reliable, a person who would help anyone in need, though he often kept to himself. Most days he worked on his ranch, caring for his animals, fixing fences, and riding across the open fields that stretched for miles. Despite his tough exterior, Jack had a gentle heart and a sharp eye for noticing when something was wrong. That morning, he had planned to check on the far side of his property, but as he rode toward the dusty road leading to town, he noticed someone walking along the edge of the street. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s. She moved carefully, keeping her head down and her arms wrapped tightly around herself. There was something about her that made Jack pause. Her clothes were neat but worn, and her boots had dirt stains, suggesting she had walked a long distance. What caught his attention most, though, were the small, dark marks visible on the skin of her forearms, peeking from beneath her long sleeves. Jack's horse slowed as he approached, almost sensing the tension in the air. The young woman glanced up briefly and quickly looked away, her eyes wide and cautious. Jack could see fear in the way she held herself, the slight trembling in her hands, and the way she avoided meeting his gaze. He dismounted slowly, keeping his movements calm and unthreatening. "Morning," Jack said softly, tipping his hat. "Name S. Jack. You look like you've been walking a long time, need some water." Instead, he leaned against the fence, giving her space while keeping her within sight. "All right," he said calmly. "If you change your mind, there's water at the store up ahead. Folks there are friendly. You can take a rest too." Jack watched her until she disappeared around the corner, but he couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that something was very wrong. He had seen people with trouble before, and though he didn't know her story, he knew she needed help. By the time he reached the town, Jack's mind was still on the young woman. He went about his usual errands, buying supplies and greeting a few locals, but every now and then he found himself glancing toward the road, hoping to catch another glimpse of her. Hours passed, and as the sun climbed higher, the town streets grew busier. Then he saw her again, sitting quietly on the edge of a bench outside a small shop. Her eyes were distant, fixed on the ground, and she kept one hand clutched around her bag while the other rested awkwardly on her arm, as if she were trying to hide something. Jack approached slowly, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly. "You look like you could use a place to sit, maybe some shade." I'm fine," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Jack crouched a little, lowering himself to her level without invading her space. "It's okay. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Just know I'm here if you need anything." Jack noticed the bruises again, darker than he first thought, tracing along the curve of her arm. He didn't speak of them. He knew that any mention could scare her off. Instead, he kept the conversation light. "Name S. Jack," he said. "I work on a ranch not far from here. Horses, cows, a bit of everything. Quiet place. You ever been around horses?" The quiet moment stretched, filled with the distant sounds of the town, the clatter of hooves on cobblestone, the hum of voices, the creak of old signs swaying in the breeze. Jack sensed her hesitation. He knew that someone in her position might be used to people offering help but not being safe. He decided patience was key. "I'll be around," he said softly. "If you need a hand, a meal, or just someone to sit with, you know where to find me." The realization settled in him fully. She was hiding from something or someone. Later, as the afternoon sun cast long shadows over the streets, Jack saw her walking again, this time toward the outskirts of town. He mounted his horse quietly and followed, staying a safe distance behind. They passed the fields where wildflowers swayed, and the wind carried the scent of fresh hay. The young woman moved with quiet urgency, her bag clutched tightly, her eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting danger at every turn. Jack understood the language of fear. He had seen it in people before, sometimes on the ranch, sometimes in town. It was silent, heavy, and exhausting. He didn't ride up to her immediately. Instead, he matched her pace from a distance, allowing her to keep her sense of control while knowing he was there to intervene if needed. As evening approached, she stopped at the edge of an abandoned shed, looking around nervously. Jack slowed his horse and called out gently, "It's getting late. You shouldn't be out here alone. There's a safe place not far from here, warm, dry, and quiet. You don't have to go back to where you came from tonight." Jack dismounted again, keeping his movements slow and non-threatening. Hey, it's all right," he said gently. "You don't have to tell me now. Just know you're not alone. You don't have to face it by yourself." The young woman's shoulders shook slightly as she fought back tears. Jack remained patient, his calm presence a quiet anchor in the storm of her emotions. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke in a whisper that barely carried over the wind. I don't know if I can. I promise I'll make sure you're safe. You can trust me. No one will hurt you if you're with me." And in that moment, Jack made a silent vow to protect her, not because she owed him anything, but because no one deserved to live in fear. The sun dipped lower behind the hills, casting a golden glow over the plains. The air was cooler now and the shadows grew long. Jack offered his hand, simple and honest. "You don't have to say yes right now, but when you're ready, I'll be here. There's a safe place waiting." The evening air was filled with the quiet sounds of the countryside, the distant lowing of cows, the rustling of leaves, and the occasional bird returning to its nest. Jack knew that this was the beginning, the fragile first step toward a life she could choose for herself. And he also knew, deep down, that he would not leave her side until she felt safe. As darkness settled over the plains, she finally gave a small, tentative nod, almost imperceptible. Jack smiled gently, not saying a word, knowing that this tiny gesture marked the first moment of hope she had allowed herself in a long time. He stayed nearby, silently watching, offering reassurance without pressure. The night stretched ahead of them, quiet, protective, and full of possibilities. And though neither spoke much more that evening, both felt the unspoken understanding that something had changed. The young woman was no longer entirely alone, and Jack's quiet presence promised a safety she had not known for years. It was the beginning of a journey, one that would be long and difficult, but also filled with the possibility of trust, healing, and freedom. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the small town, casting long, golden rays across the streets. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of dust and earth from the surrounding plains. Jack rode into town early, his mind still on the young woman he had met the day before. He couldn't stop thinking about her, the way she moved, the fear in her eyes, and the bruises on her arms. Something inside him told him that she needed more than a kind word or a cup of water. She needed help, and he wanted to make sure she got it. The town was quiet at this hour. Shops were just beginning to open, and a few early risers were already on the streets, tending to their daily routines. Jack dismounted near the general store and tied his horse to a post. He decided to buy some bread and milk, small items that might be useful if he saw her again. As he walked inside, he kept his eyes on the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. It wasn't long before he saw her. She was walking quickly, her bag held tightly, and her eyes downcast. Her steps were hesitant, as if she was always listening for danger. Jack noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands clenched and unclenched. He could see more of the bruises now, dark marks on her arms that spoke of past struggles and pain. He felt a pang in his chest. He had always been protective of those who could not protect themselves, and he knew she was one of them. He followed at a safe distance, careful not to scare her. She moved through the streets quietly, avoiding the few people who were already out and about. Jack observed everything: the way she flinched when someone approached, the way she paused to listen before crossing the street, and the way her eyes darted toward the shadows as if expecting someone to be hiding there. Jack decided to approach carefully. He walked up to her slowly, keeping his hands visible and his voice gentle. "Morning," he said softly. "You look like you could use a place to sit, maybe some shade and a little rest. Just know that if you need a break or some water, There's a bench over there, and I'll be nearby. Name's Jack, he said softly. I work on a ranch not far from here. Horses, cows, a bit of everything, quiet place. You ever been around horses? No pressure. Jack understood. He had met people who had nowhere to go, people running from trouble or trying to escape difficult situations. He did not press her for details. Instead, he offered small reassurances. Well, if you need a place to rest for a while, I know a safe spot. Quiet, warm, and peaceful. You don't have to go back to wherever you came from today. He noticed her patterns. She avoided certain streets, she hurried past specific houses, and she flinched at familiar voices. Jack began to piece together a story from her actions, realizing that she was hiding from someone or perhaps something. He spoke quietly to townspeople he trusted, asking subtle questions about her without drawing attention. No one seemed to know much, which confirmed Jack's suspicion that she was trying to remain invisible. One afternoon, Jack saw her walking toward the edge of town. She moved quickly, her bag clutched tightly to her chest and her eyes scanning the surroundings. Jack followed, keeping a safe distance. He could see the tension in her body, the way she paused at every corner, listening for sounds that might indicate danger. He understood the language of fear. He had seen it before in people who had nowhere to turn and no one to trust. As she stopped near an abandoned shed, Jack approached slowly, his voice gentle. It's getting late. You shouldn't be out here alone. There's a safe place not far from here. Warm, quiet, and nobody will bother you. You don't have to go back to where you came from tonight. He dismounted and stayed a few feet away, careful not to invade her space. You don't have to tell me anything, he said softly. I just want to make sure you're safe. You can stay with me, or you can go somewhere else, but you won't be alone. She looked at the bruises on her arms, the marks she had tried to hide from the world, and then at Jack, whose calm presence offered something she had not felt in a long time, trust. Finally, after a long pause, she spoke in a whisper. I don't know if I can. I promise I'll make sure you're safe. You can trust me. He simply sat nearby, giving her space while remaining close enough that she felt protected. For the first time in days, she felt a small measure of comfort, a tiny spark of hope. Over the next week, Jack continued to watch over her, always from a respectful distance. He did not pressure her to talk, but he offered small gestures of kindness, water, food, a place to sit in the shade, and quiet company. He noticed the little things, how she flinched at sudden movements, how she avoided certain streets, and how she seemed to shrink whenever someone looked at her. Jack realized that she had been living in fear for a long time. Her world was small, restricted, and filled with danger, but slowly he saw tiny signs of trust emerging. She began to accept water or food without hesitation. She allowed him to speak to her without fear. She even glanced at him when he spoke, a small step toward connection. One afternoon, as the sun hung high in the sky, Jack approached her again. There's a quiet place not far from here, he said softly. You don't have to go back. You can stay as long as you need. Just know that you have a choice, and you don't have to face it alone. Jack's patience and kindness allowed her to feel safe, even in small ways. She began to talk a little, sharing fragments of her past, though always carefully, never revealing everything at once. Jack listened without judgment, offering understanding and support. By the end of the week, Jack knew that she was beginning to trust him. The bruises on her arms were still visible, a reminder of the life she had left behind, but the fear in her eyes had started to soften. He could see that she was ready to take the next step, though it would not be easy. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jack approached her again. You don't have to go back there, he said quietly. You can stay with me. You can be safe. You don't have to face that fear alone anymore. Okay, I'll go with you. For the first time in a long time, she felt that maybe, just maybe, she could have a life free from fear. Jack stayed close, not as a controller or a judge, but as a protector, a quiet presence offering safety, patience, and understanding. And as the stars began to shine in the clear night sky, both knew that this was only the beginning of a long journey, one filled with healing, trust, and the possibility of a brighter future. The days passed slowly, each one bringing the young woman closer to a decision she had avoided for so long. She stayed mostly quiet, observing the world around her and testing the boundaries of her newfound safety. Jack did not push her. He knew that trust could not be forced, only earned, and he had patience in abundance. Every gesture of kindness, every moment of calm, was a building block for the fragile trust she had begun to place in him. Her mornings were still hesitant. She woke early, often staring at the ceiling of the small room Jack had offered her, her thoughts tangled in fear and doubt. Memories of the life she had left behind surfaced uninvited, shadows of the past that made her flinch even in safety. Yet the difference now was that Jack was there, not as a rescuer who demanded loyalty, but as a quiet, steady presence. His simple acts of care, bringing her food without comment, offering blankets when the nights were cold, and speaking softly when she wanted to talk, made the weight of her fear a little lighter each day. One afternoon, Jack found her sitting outside, her arms wrapped around her knees as she stared at the distant hills. He approached slowly, keeping his tone gentle and calm. "You've been quiet today," he said softly. "Everything okay?" The mind holds onto what it knows, even when it's painful, but that doesn't mean you have to go back. You have a choice now. But the choice is yours, and it will be the right choice because it's your choice. No one else can decide it for you. She began to consider the possibility of leaving entirely, not just physically but emotionally, severing the chains that had bound her to fear. That evening, Jack left her with a small task. "If you want," he said, "you could pack a few things, just a bag enough for a few days, nothing fancy. When you're ready, we'll leave, no rush, one step at a time." Packing her things meant commitment. It meant acknowledging that she could leave the life she had known, the place that had hurt her so deeply. Her hands trembled as she looked at the small bag Jack had offered, a simple canvas sack that seemed to carry the weight of possibility. She sat on the floor, staring at it for what felt like hours, her mind wrestling with fear, doubt, and a small glimmer of hope. Finally, she began to move. Slowly, deliberately, she pulled out a few items, a change of clothes, a small notebook she had carried for years, and a photograph she kept hidden. Each object was a piece of her old life, a tether to the past she was not yet ready to fully let go. As she packed, memories surfaced, moments of laughter, quiet dreams, and the pain that had accompanied them. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not stop. This was her choice, her first act of independence in years. Jack watched from the doorway, giving her space but remaining close. He did not speak, knowing that words could overwhelm her. His presence was enough, a silent promise that she would not face what came next alone. The next day she moved more confidently. She packed a few more necessities, a small blanket, a pair of sturdy boots, and a water bottle. Each item was a symbol, a step toward freedom. The simple act of packing became empowering. For the first time, she felt that her future could be different, that she could exist outside the fear that had dominated her life. Jack helped in small ways, offering advice without taking control. "You might want to pack a bit of food," he suggested. "A few days' worth. You never know how long it might take to get settled." Mornings were spent preparing for departure, afternoons in thoughtful conversation, and evenings in reflection. Jack spoke of the ranch, of the animals, of the simple joys of work and nature. He did not pressure her to come with him, but he painted a picture of safety and peace, a life she could choose if she wished. One afternoon, as they walked near the edge of the town, the young woman spoke quietly. "I've never felt like this before," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Safe, I mean. And it's about giving yourself permission to heal." She thought about the life she had left behind, about the chains she was breaking, and about the person she was beginning to become. Slowly, a resolve took root. She would leave. She would take the step she had long feared, and she would do it on her terms. The next morning she rose early, her movements careful but determined. She packed the last of her belongings, a few personal items, a small bag of food, and her notebook. Each item represented a piece of her old life, but also a promise that she could start anew. She tied the bag securely, slinging it over her shoulder, and took a deep breath. Jack was waiting quietly, his horse saddled and ready. He did not speak immediately, sensing that this moment was hers alone. She approached slowly, her steps steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I'm ready," she said softly, her voice carrying a mixture of fear and determination. Jack nodded, offering a reassuring smile. "Good, we'll take it one step at a time." "You're not alone." It was not easy to leave behind everything she had known, even the painful parts. But she also felt a surge of strength, knowing that she had made this choice herself. The journey was quiet. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of the plains. Birds flew overhead, and the distant hills stretched endlessly into the horizon. For the first time in years, she felt the possibility of a life unbound by fear. Jack rode beside her, offering silent reassurance. He did not speak of the past or demand explanations. His quiet presence was enough, a reminder that she could trust, that she could be safe, and that her choices mattered. As the day wore on, they reached a small clearing where Jack's horse could rest. He dismounted, allowing her to set down her bag. She did so carefully, almost reverently, as if placing her past gently onto the earth and taking a step forward into the unknown. "You did well," Jack said softly. "This is the first real step. The rest will come slowly, but you'll manage. You're stronger than you think." "Thank you," she whispered. I didn't know if I could do this." Fear had not vanished, but it had less power now. And for the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future, one filled with safety, trust, and possibility. As evening approached, they prepared to continue their journey. She packed her bag, checked her few belongings, and adjusted her clothing. Each small act reinforced her independence, her ability to manage her life, and her courage to face the unknown. Jack stayed close, offering guidance only when necessary. His presence was steady, reassuring, but never controlling. He knew that this journey was hers, and that the trust she had placed in him was fragile and precious. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the plains, they had traveled several miles. The young woman felt exhaustion in her body, but a quiet satisfaction in her heart. She had taken control of her life for the first time in years, and the road ahead, though uncertain, felt possible. For the first time, she allowed herself a sense of hope, not a naive or fleeting hope, but a grounded, determined hope born from courage and choice. Jack rode beside her, offering protection, encouragement, and understanding, his calm presence a constant reminder that she was not alone. And as the stars began to appear in the night sky, the young woman felt a quiet strength settle within her. She had made the first real decision for herself. She had taken the step toward freedom, safety, and a life that she could shape on her own. The journey was only beginning, but for the first time, she believed she could face it. The morning air was crisp and cool as the young woman and Jack prepared to leave. The first light of dawn painted the horizon in soft shades of pink and orange, and the plains stretched endlessly before them. The young woman carried her small bag firmly over her shoulder, feeling its weight like the weight of a decision finally made. She had packed the essentials, a few changes of clothes, a small blanket, some food, and her notebook. Each item was a small token of her independence, a symbol of the life she was choosing for herself. Jack led his horse alongside her as they walked slowly out of the town. He stayed a few steps behind, giving her space to feel in control, yet close enough that she could sense his protective presence. The streets were quiet, the usual bustle of the town still asleep, and the soft crunch of their footsteps on the dirt road seemed louder than it should have. She kept glancing around nervously, half expecting someone from her past to appear. "You're doing well," Jack said softly, breaking the silence. "Just keep going, one step at a time." Her heart raced, not just with fear but with anticipation. She was leaving behind a life of fear, stepping into the unknown, and yet for the first time she felt a spark of hope. The road out of town led them past open fields dotted with wildflowers. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying a faint scent of earth and rain from the previous night. She looked around, taking in the vastness of the plains, and felt a strange mixture of freedom and vulnerability. She had never been able to walk this far without fear, without someone watching her, judging her, or threatening her. Now she walked with someone who offered only protection and respect. After a few miles, they reached a small stream where the horse could drink and she could rest. Jack dismounted and offered her a seat on a smooth, flat rock near the water. "You can take a break here," he said gently. "Drink some water, eat a little, and catch your breath." She took a small bite of the bread he had packed, and for a moment the world seemed to slow. No one was chasing her, no one was shouting or hurting her, and the only sounds were the rustle of leaves, the gentle flow of water, and the distant call of birds. As they rested, Jack spoke quietly about the ranch, the animals, and the life he led there. "It's a quiet place," he said. "Simple. Nothing fancy, but it's safe. You can heal there if you want. Take your time, learn to trust again, and just be yourself." After a short rest, they continued their journey. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth and the air around them. Her legs ached from the long walk, and her bag felt heavier than before, but each step strengthened her resolve. She was moving toward a life she had never dared to imagine, and the act of walking itself felt empowering. Along the way, they encountered small obstacles. A fallen tree blocked part of the path, and a narrow creek needed crossing. Jack helped her carefully, guiding her hand and offering support without taking control. Each challenge, though minor, was a test of her growing confidence. She realized that she could manage these situations, that she was capable of handling more than she had believed. As the day wore on, they found a quiet place to rest for the night. Jack had scouted a small clearing surrounded by trees, offering shelter and privacy. They set up a simple camp, with a small fire for warmth. The young woman unpacked her blanket and carefully arranged her few belongings. For the first time in years, she felt a sense of ownership over her space, a small sanctuary where she could simply exist without fear. That evening, as they sat near the fire, Jack spoke softly. "You've come a long way today," he said. "Not just in distance, but in courage. It's not easy to leave everything behind, but you did it. And that shows how strong you are. That's it, simple and safe." She slept more deeply than she had in years, the fear that had haunted her for so long giving way, if only slightly, to a fragile sense of security. The next morning, they continued their journey, moving through the plains with careful steps. The young woman grew more confident with each mile. She noticed the small joys around her, the scent of wildflowers, the way the sunlight danced across the grass, and the gentle hum of life in the open fields. These simple things, once unnoticed or terrifying, now brought her comfort. Jack continued to offer guidance without control. He pointed out safe paths, helped her navigate rough terrain, and offered small bits of encouragement. Each act was a reminder that she could trust someone, that she could rely on help without fear, and that her life could be different. By mid-afternoon, they encountered a small village. It was quiet, with people tending to daily chores and children playing in open yards. Jack suggested they stop briefly to gather supplies and rest. The young woman hesitated, nervous about interacting with strangers, but she agreed. Together, they entered a small general store, and she found that she could speak to the shopkeeper without fear. The simple act of buying bread and water felt empowering, a confirmation that she was reclaiming small pieces of normal life. After leaving the village, they continued toward the ranch. The sun began to dip low in the sky, casting long shadows over the plains. The young woman's steps slowed slightly, fatigue setting in, but Jack stayed close, offering support without pressure. She felt the weight of her journey, the physical strain, the emotional intensity, but also a sense of accomplishment. Each mile brought her closer to safety, to freedom, and to the possibility of a new life. By evening, they reached the outskirts of Jack's ranch. The sight of the fences, the animals grazing in the fields, and the small wooden house brought a strange mixture of relief and anticipation. The young woman felt her heart race, unsure of what awaited her, yet filled with hope. Jack dismounted and led her toward the house. "Welcome," he said simply. "This is your safe place now. Take your time, settle in, and know that you're not alone." She fed the animals, explored the fields, and even rode a horse with Jack's guidance. Each small activity reinforced her independence and her confidence. The fear that had dominated her life slowly receded, replaced by a quiet sense of possibility. Jack remained patient and supportive, never pushing her to do more than she felt ready for. He offered guidance and protection, but always with respect for her choices. This allowed her to rebuild trust at her own pace, learning that safety could coexist with freedom. Evenings were spent quietly, sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the plains. The young woman reflected on her journey, the fear she had left behind, the courage she had discovered, and the life she was beginning to build. Slowly, she allowed herself to imagine a future where fear no longer dictated her actions, where she could make choices freely, and where she could feel safe in her own skin. And as night fell over the ranch, the stars shining brightly overhead, she felt a deep sense of gratitude. The journey had been long and difficult, but she had taken the steps herself, guided by trust, patience, and the quiet support of someone who cared. For the first time in years, she felt hope, a fragile but growing hope that life could be different, and that she had the strength to embrace it.